So this is our podcast in terms of the application of breathing in business. And you might ask, are the two compatible? Breathing is often seen to be something that's performed on the fringes of society by a select group of individuals, whereas business is seen to be as more mainstream. So really we're going to have a chat, and I have author here is Kevin Kelly, and he's the author of a number of best-selling books in terms of the application of business and also in terms of traits of the best leaders and traits of employees, and looking at how breathing, the workplace, and of course, the changing environment and how it all interacts. So welcome to this podcast, and I'll pass you over to Kevin.
How you doing, Pat? Good to be here. Yeah, it seems like there's probably a lack of link, but the reality is probably one of the greatest moves in business now is, obviously you're well aware of this, is mindfulness and focusing on breathing and getting into the moment, and as a result gaining clarity and being able to speak eloquently based on that clarity. One could argue that's something that's missing pretty much major worldwide at the moment. So absolutely the two are coming together. Another issue obviously that I keep hearing, I'm no expert on it, sleeping. So sleeping, breathing, mindfulness, there's no doubt about it. You guys are getting in the back door.
So Kevin, the interesting thing is though, I know if I was to approach a corporate CEO, and if I was to talk to that CEO about mindfulness, he'll probably run out the back door just as quick as I've come in. So is there really, what we should be looking at, I suppose, is what would be the traits that you would see that if you were an employee, or if you were a leader, if you were in management and you were looking at your employees, what traits would you like your employees to be able to have? And also, as an employee, what's the traits that could really empower you in the workplace in terms of, things that you can bring into your own way of life to improve concentration, etc. So that's, just looking at that aspect of it.
Well, I think the first thing that's important to realize, and this is a massive issue worldwide, is the lack of engagement. That's in every society around the world. So the best possible estimate of engagement figures worldwide is less than 30%. Less than 30%. So I think the first thing we need to talk about is it is time for a wake-up call, because everything they're trying is not raising that bar. I've been watching that statistic over the last 10 to 20 years. Gallup comes out with their extensive research, and it's either 29%, 28%, 30%. Some say in Ireland, for example, 19%. So the reality is it's time for a wake-up, because clearly we're not solving the problem. Engagement levels aren't getting any higher. So yes, on the one hand, one could argue, Mr. McKeown's coming in here with these great breathing ideas and sleeping ideas, and he's going to put us to sleep. But the fact is, we need new ideas. You can't, as was it Einstein that said, you can't solve the problems with the same technology that created them. So without a doubt, number one, there is an opening for a new solution. That's the first point. The second point then is, like, in the context of just merely thinking about where employees sit and what they can do. First link is the massive link between the leader and the employee. The majority of research points that a person leaves the job because of their leader or their manager. So that's the first thing. But let's just talk from purely a self-empowerment point of view. And I'm an employee and I'm trying to up my productivity. So the key metrics we're looking all the time is engagement. We're looking at creativity, the ideas they bring to the table, etc. So what can they do based on well, there's a few things. I'll throw in some of what I believe, but let's take your work particularly. Clearly, clarity is critical. They have got to be in the moment in that job. Now, all distraction stats, as you know, I've spoken a lot on attention, shows that our attention spans are minimal. They said in 2012 the average attention span was 12 seconds. Most recently it went down to 8 seconds. The average attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. That's what we're competing with here. So number one, their attention spans are absolutely minimal. Also, there is an unbelievable level of distraction. We have all seen the research on Where is it? It distracted you a second ago.
It did, yeah, totally. I had to put my phone onto flight mode there.
Yeah.
And it's crazy, even though I turned on the sound before the podcast, but that was a prime example.
It is a prime example, and here's the bad news, is by the research is showing by turning it upside down still doesn't solve the problem. You're still going to be distracted. The only way you'll actually solve the problem is that phone goes out of the room. All research shows that. Interestingly enough, they say that a person starts a task and is being interrupted every 3 minutes, 5 seconds, according to Gloria Mark, the University of California. But here's the interesting thing. It takes you 23 minutes to get back to focus on that job at hand.
So in other words, if you're constantly disrupted, you will never get to finish a task. But I want to bring you back to engagement, because what does it mean? What does the word engagement mean? Is it that the employee is not fully committed in what they are doing, or is it the customer, or is it who is it, or what is it?
Well, so engagement basically means that they're not fully there. They're not in the moment. And okay, so for me, the Rolls Royce of an employer, anybody out there, to me, the most important thing is that you're doing what you love. When you do what you love, it offers so much. You're so much willing to learn. You're like a sponge on new knowledge. And more importantly, as the famous psychologist, now I'm not very good at pronouncing his name, but he was Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, let's call him that anyway. He wrote the book of Psychology of Flow. When you do what you love, you get in flow, where you execute tasks with effortless ease. So that's the Rolls Royce. But let's bring it back to reality. If you were to ask the majority or the listeners at the moment, if they were to do a little straw poll of 20, 30 people they know very, very well and ask them this simple question: do you love your job? Do you enjoy your job? We're fairly sure that they will follow the worldwide metrics, that there might be 3 out of 30 that really love their job. So seeing that the majority of people don't love their job, one of the tips, if I can share a tip, I always believe you should look towards, is work every day as if you were auditioning for your dream job. So you go in with that mindset, and you're aware that in that moment you may be on a phone call to somebody, like happened to many of us in the past, and because you're doing it as well as you possibly can, maybe that's a potential employer, whatever. So I think we have to be realistic. Not everyone is doing their dream job, but we also have to be instructive and say, listen, go there and approach every day as if it is your dream job, or as if you're auditioning for your dream job, and productivity might go up. So
what you're saying is, Dan, we really should be looking at, we should be self-employed ourselves. Even though we're working for a company, our whole task is to empower ourselves, to upskill, because we never know where that's going to go. And you listen, I totally agree with it, because I was in the corporate world, and I have to say I didn't like it. But a lot of us who were in the same frame of mind, all we did was bitch and give out about the company that we were working for. And sometimes I still do it 20 years later. But at the same time, I applied myself to the best that I could do it. And a lot of the skills that I picked up then, you do carry them with you. So I think that's really, really good advice. Approaching leaders, do you think corporate leaders are of the mind frame to be accepting about improving employees' concentration, improving their sleep, improving their ability to focus, improving their ability to handle stress? Do you think leaders have moved on, or are we still talking about leaders with a mindset that it's the same, like here's the boss and here's the employees and that's the way it is, and who cares? But then again, I suppose your comment was many employees are leaving not because of the job but because of the leader.
But can I just go back first, because I think it's important, because obviously we're now in COVID times, as people are calling, and just you made a very big important point there about the whole idea of wanting to continually improve, continually learn, continually grow. I think it's fascinating having discussions with people just this week, because, for example, I spoke to 2 companies. One of the company is a super company, and this is a managing director. It's an SME. He's very progressive, and all he's thinking about is, listen, when this is over, I want to be hitting the ground running. So at the moment, let's call it, he's doing a spring clean. He's doing a spring clean of his processes. He's looking at the training needs. He's looking at, where they can improve in terms of customer satisfaction. He's calling the customers because the customers are still alive and they still want to hear from you, and you still need to talk to them and see is there anything you can help, etc. That was one example. He then provided me with another example. He was speaking to his peer who also owns a very, a nice, substantial SME. And basically his dialogue was very simple. All he was thinking about was, when is this going to be over? And he wasn't proactive at all. He was, it's okay. We'll work when we have to. We'll take this time to do nothing. I think that's the wrong approach. I think, for example, and I think this is an important point, and that's why I came back to this. I think that anybody listening today, a key metric that I would measure you on is, what have you done in the last 4 weeks? What have you done to upskill, to learn? Clearly, the people that are listening to this podcast are in the zone, are in the right position, because they're saying, okay, maybe even if I get one actionable idea from this podcast, it's been worthwhile. But that's the mindset to be in. The mindset to be, because you're controlling the controllable. And the only thing we control at the moment is our attitude, our, where we're at, how we can learn more, and so forth and so on. That's what we need to focus on. So I think it's really important to say that the question is, what have you done in the last 4 weeks to make a better version of you, if you know what I'm saying?
But this again could come back to the fit of what you were talking about earlier. If you really love your job, you always want to progress in it. And it's if you find doing a task is almost like your hobby, there's no problem waking up of a Monday morning. There's no problem staying, staying to the best in terms of updating your knowledge. For instance, in breathing, I was lucky enough to find a job that I'm well suited for. And I've no problem reading books on breathing on my day off. I've no problem learning and learning and learning and learning. And that's the way it is. And I think you are in the same position. So you'd really wonder then, what's the chicken and what's the egg? How do you get somebody that's so passionate, so committed, that they have an immense love and pleasure for what they are doing? And I think this is frame of mind, which is coming into this again. Because I can imagine that if you have a manager or employees with agitated mind, difficulty focusing, scatterbrains, maybe some people would call them, you're not really focused, you're not there, you're a little bit all over the place. And it's like the individual, you were saying, talking about the constant interruptions. You start doing something, but not only are you being interrupted by external inputs coming in, but you're also interrupted by the distractions of the mind, the incessant thinking of the mind, which is a constant distraction. And if you cannot focus, you can't apply 100% of your attention on doing what you're doing. And if you're having constant interruptions, you're not going to complete that job. So it's amazing, isn't it, the interlink between everything. Do you have any examples of leaders who are fitting into this that would be role models, or companies, or whether it be CEOs that you would kind of admire and say, this person here has achieved something, and in terms of that application?
So I'm going to move back to a previous point again, because it's a huge point, and I know, like, based on my 20 years speaking on this stuff, this is the question that a lot of people ask, and I'm going to bring it into self-awareness. And of course, so they were very clear as well, the self-awareness that we're talking about for years now, and was the domain of white coats. When I brought out my first book in 1996, I had a chapter called In Silence Comes Wisdom, and I was lucky that I wasn't carried away like into a psychiatric ward. Stanford Business Advisory Committee said that the most important attribute a leader should develop is self-awareness. So let me give you some facts on self-awareness. There was some really interesting study done by a lady called Tasha Eurich, E-U-R-I-C-H, and she measured self-awareness in people. And to simplify it somewhat, she asked the question, how self-aware are you? And basically 85% of people said they were very self-aware. When she did the follow-up work and study, she found that 15% of people were self-aware. Now, what does that mean? That means that there is a lot of people for a lot of a big part of the day lying to themselves. That's a huge, huge point. So what does that mean? So I'm in a job, and am I lying to myself? If you're not self-aware and understand where you're at, it's very hard to give to anything else when you haven't got your own homework done. Let's put it that way, okay? I think, so I'll give you a very interesting example of this in play. I was doing a conference once down, I'll make this I'll edit it, but I was doing a conference once down in the south of Ireland, and the HR director said to me, listen, we have a major, major problem with a few of our guys. And he says, I wonder, could you tell me who those people are? And I says, no problem whatsoever. I actually said 5 minutes with a group of 25 people, and I'll tell you. Now, that's based on research that was done by Ambadi and Rosenthal. They say you can analyze people in 8 to 10 seconds. So just be very aware of that. So anyway, I says, give me 5 minutes. He says, that is not possible. And I says, it is. It's totally possible. Why? Because people's autobiography is their biology. You can, like, within minutes, you can read where a person is at in the journey. So they may not be aware of it, self-awareness, but the person they're dealing with is damn sure they know who this person is. Now, clearly, in an ideal world, you know what you're projecting so that it isn't somebody else telling you, you know exactly where you stand. So anyway, I remember the day clearly. It was a sunny day. The sun was coming in the window. I was getting ready and getting prepared, doing some notes on the flip chart. And the first guy walks in before the session starts. He walks up behind me, puts his hand on the semi-lectern, and he goes, yeah, I could do this. He said, I could do this. So I passed no heed. He didn't even say hello to me. I says, oh, that's fine, no problem. He walked away. And then anyway, finally, the session started. It was 25 people in theatre style. So it was 4 rows of 7 seats. They were right in front of me, okay? And straight away, I noticed a person in the back. And he was sitting in real kind of the folded arms and the folded legs and looking at me. And I knew he wasn't that comfortable. That was okay. But then he went on to the second thing that most people do in a group. I've seen this in thousands of groups in about 38 countries. It's universal. He starts looking around. So he was in the back row, and he's looking around at the other 24 people in the room. So straight away, I process that as he's looking to see, is there anybody just like him? As in, he's not happy, he's not content. So the next automatic move you make is there anybody like me? Because people like each other that are like each other. People love misery. They want to keep misery together. So they'll seek out to see another dissenting person like them. That was fine. Just at that time, the rest of them were engaged. So he decides the best form of attack is do nothing. So he looked through me for the next hour and a half, not at me. There's a difference, and you'll know that yourself when you're dealing with small groups, Pat. You'll know whether they're listening to you and engaged, or if they're looking through you and thinking of something else. It's very simple to watch. So that was fine. Anyway, the break comes at 1:30, or let's say the first break after an hour and a half. Lo and behold, who comes up to me but the gentleman himself, extended his hand out to me and says, do you know what? You are the best speaker in the world. You're the best speaker I've ever seen. Now, obviously, there'd be a part of everyone that would love to have accepted that. But the big part of my mind is going, BS. You don't mean that. I've watched you for an hour and a half. Your physiology is your autobiography, and you've told me you're disinterested, you're not happy with the content or whatever, because I was the only thing that changed in the room, remember. Yeah. Came into your room, I'm the only thing that's changed with content, etc. And so I just shook hands and, played the game. HR director comes up to me and he says, okay, Kevin. He says, tell me this. Tell me, have we got any problems? I says, you've 2 problems. You have a small problem. Now, this is back to the power of attention. You have a guy who probably, if you give him enough attention, he'll be fine. And I talked about the guy that came up and put his hand on the lectern at the start and says, I can do this, with nobody else in the room, and he didn't even talk to me. That was one. And I says, you've got a poison in your company. I says, this poison isn't willing to learn, will try to get people on side with him to create a negative little group that will create turmoil and poison throughout your organization. And he got really embarrassed. And he says, who? And I says, the guy that told me I was the best speaker in the world, clearly. And he, as I said, he got hugely embarrassed. And he says, do you know, he says, for the last 10 years, he's a director of a multinational. We've opened up every window, every door, hoping he's going to jump, but we cannot get rid of him. And my point is this guy wasn't self-aware. He wasn't clever enough to know that he was telling me everything I need to know. Because you can't actually lie, really, for somebody who is in the moment. And this is a function of being in flow, but also being focused in the moment.
Yeah.
And very clear about what's happening in front of them. You will see all the body language cues you need to know that this person isn't here, really, and is telling you a load of lies. And of course, rapport and communication is probably the most important skill in the world.
Yeah.
No.
So what you're saying is that, is the visible, what you see in terms of the movement of his body is basically a reflection of the agitation or the movement of his mind.
Correct. He didn't want to be there. He wasn't the learner. And your man told me that, the HR director told me as much. So I think it's really important, because I think, you've a massive community, and I think we always have to challenge ourselves. We have to challenge ourselves on that question is, do we actually know who we are? Do we actually know what are our values? So, I think there's a really interesting thing happening worldwide at the moment, clearly with COVID and the various styles of leadership that you see all over the place. Mm-hmm. And, for example, if I said to you at the moment, I might as well ask the question, if I was the owner of a business, would I want a leader that comes in and that doesn't listen to anybody, is dismissive of other people's opinions, is quite chauvinistic, is narcissistic, etc.? 99% of business leaders would say, no, I don't want any of that.
Totally. And yes, no employee would stick it anyway.
Absolutely not. But one could argue at the moment, and I'm going to show you the yin and yang of this, that is the most powerful person in the world at the moment, which I find simply incredible. So the question is, how did people decide to put him in that position? Because I think we always have to ask, what are we doing? Now, here's the yang, the interesting thing. And this, again, you'd have a lot of solo entrepreneurs building their business and their practice. One of the things you can learn from a lot of the leaders around the world at the moment is they are very clever on their communication strategy. What do I mean by that? So what I basically mean is as we talked about the average attention spans of 8, 9 seconds, etc. Most of these guys, that's in the majority, I'm talking obviously England, I'm talking America, they speak in sound bites, they speak in hashtags, they speak in simple, clear language, and it is imprinted on people's psyche. And people remember their message. So just to show the UK side, Boris Johnson got elected on the basis of let's get Brexit done. And no matter what question he was asked in the press conference, you can see parallels between America and the UK on this. He came back to let's get Brexit done. It didn't matter what he was asked. So these guys are fantastic at coming up their small soundbite that is memorable, and all they do is repeat it, and if they're asked questions about anything else, they come back to this, and they only answer their own questions. They don't answer the questions they're asked. So there is something you can learn from them.
So
as well.
it's really interesting, and what your point is that it's reflective of the mind of the population at large at the moment.
Can you just repeat that? We had a freeze. Sorry.
It's very interesting, but what you're saying is that it's reflective of the intelligence or the mind of the population at large at the moment.
Well, what I'm saying is this, and I think it's always important, on the one hand, we can argue about political leaders, which, I'm just interested purely from a leadership context. And at the moment, most of these leaders are breaking all rules. Most of us wouldn't have them next or near a company, yet they're the most powerful people in the world. How did they get there? They didn't get there themselves. They got there because they were elected. 46.1% of people voted for Donald Trump, for example, in America. So I think we all have to ask ourselves questions. And I know that, we're getting into a very, how would I call it? It's a challenging area because people, people don't like mixing politics and business. But let's be very clear here. It is being mixed and mixed totally, because what these leaders are doing at the moment have a massive impact on what's going to happen in business worldwide.
Totally,
without a doubt,
yeah.
Based on climate change, based on tariffs, based on anything they do, they're having a massive impact. So, for example, I sit here today, and because of a lot of the decisions that are being made, I may not be traveling as freely as I'd like from here on in around the world because of, all the things. So they are integral. So what I suggest is that people choose wisely.
Yeah, no, it's I think I'd love to know, in terms of, you were talking about the goldfish having an attention span that's more than the average individual at the moment. What do you think has caused a drop to this attention span? And I'd like to speak about then a couple of minutes in terms of how could we improve attention span. But just from your own perspective, it's clearly happened fairly recently, 20 years, that our attention span has diminished, and to the point that it's almost that in some ways we're overburdened by information. We have information overload, that it's often difficult then to decide on what's real and what's not real. And not only that we have decision fatigue, because if the mind is tired, you will literally grasp it as a snippet of information. And I think I liked the way you said that. It's a tweet, it's a sound bar that's coming out. It's only a few letters, it's only a few words. But yet, when it's repeated over and over and over and over and over, it's almost that the population is hypnotized by it. And that gets results. So does it say as well, even applying this as well, and here's another question, applying that then in a business setting, is that the way customers should be treated? That we are repeating sound bars over and over and over and over and over, because the customer also, are they in the same situation? Not that I'm downgrading the customer or anything like that, but I'm just wondering about the psyche of the individual in the last 20 years now. And I'm not even going to touch on it in terms of teenagers and depression rates and anxiety rates, but just in the population at large, and primarily due to the devices that we were looking at a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, look, so there is so much distraction, without a doubt. I mean, as I said, I can give you any amount of studies, etc. on that. There's no question. They're saying 100,500 words daily. They even say that 65% of 55 to 64-year-olds tweet, watch TV, and surf at the same time. And we all thought that, that distraction was the art of the Gen Zs.
And Kevin, do you think multitasking is possible?
No, I don't. And a load of science proves that as well. I don't want to in any ways insult all the ladies who have made an art form saying that they can multitask. But the reality is, studies show that if you do, there's a recent study now, I mightn't get it right, but they got people to recite the alphabet, and then they got them to recite the number line, and then they asked them to mix it, A1, B2, and so forth and so on. And when they checked the timing on it, so it was on multitasking, that to think of both numbers and alphabet, they found that the combined total was the same as if they'd done each individually. My point being that if you're multitasking, when you stop one task and come back to the other, you're not going to gain time as much as people would like to.
Yeah. So really what we are doing is that we're fleeting from one subject to another, and we're putting our attention on this for a period of time, and then we're moving over to another thing for a period of time. So we're not doing two things at once. And I suppose this boils down to, if we could multitask, we could text while driving a car. And I've done it a couple of times. I shouldn't have done it, but I know that it's a very, very dangerous thing to do, because when you're texting, your attention is on the phone and it's not on the wheel. And that's why there's a reason that
Study shows it's the most
not working.
dangerous thing you can do, period, is texting and driving. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's all there. There's no question about it. But there's one thing that I just wanted to take another parallel thing, because I'm always into empowerment and how we can do things better. One of the things is we are living in a knowledge economy, without a doubt. We have so much knowledge. You know, like one of the positives for me, you know, of COVID, there isn't much positives, but one of them was being able to sit here and look at the best lecturers in the world, the best behavioral economists on YouTube, free. You know, it was like having a university here. So we've any amount of knowledge at our fingertips. Knowledge is absolutely pervasive. What isn't pervasive is our bandwidth to absorb it. So they're saying, for example, another stats, that there's 11 million bits of information and data all around us every second, and we have a bandwidth of 60 bytes. Like, I mean, it's crazy. Okay, that's the one side.
Yeah.
So attention is king, and the power of attention. That's why I'm excited for you to talk about what people can do to focus in on the moment and mindfulness, because it's a critical skill. But let me come back to one key thing. The more we invest, and this has been talked about now, I just noticed on a recent seminar. I wrote about this in 1996. It was when I decided to write a bestseller. I had a D in English in my Leaving Cert, I had a D in English in my Junior Cert. Everybody said that it's not possible to write a bestseller when you're, you know, that poor at English. But I just kept focusing on the goal, focusing on the dream. The reason I bring that up is that if I'd focused on the collective intelligence that was available at that time, which was people with D's don't write bestsellers. I had no background in writing a book. No one had written a motivation title in Ireland in 1996. I was the first of its kind. Collective intelligence told me, big data, small data, is that I hadn't enough information. And I hadn't got what it took to write a bestseller. My point is knowledge always gives you enough reasons not to act. So in the era of the knowledge economy, I think it's very important for people that are on this call that have dreams of building a practice, for thinking outside the box. There was nothing out there to tell me that you were going to make a success out of a very niche business of breathing through your nose, based on the fact that you was a sales manager for a rent-a-car company, you know. But the knowledge says you can't do it, but the dream was bigger than that, and your focus propelled you through it. Similarly with any of the goals that I talk about. So my point is yes, we are distracted, but be very clear that if you have a dream, whatever you do, don't left brain it out of existence by reviewing all the intelligence that's out there. That's one thing. Yeah. Second thing I want to make a point, which is really interesting. Another study that was done, everybody's heard of the cocktail party effect. So that you're in a party, or you're at, you know, a meeting or whatever, how, you know, you could be in a hotel lobby, and that you can listen into specific, you know, you could be in the midst of a conversation and you hear your name mentioned somewhere else, and you can zoom in on that conversation. And what it shows is we have the bandwidth in terms of focus. So there is the power to focus on a dream and, you know, end up in a place you describe and better than your starting point. We can engage the power of flow if we're doing what we love. If, you know, and that's a big ask, but there's loads of people in this call that love it. And the question I'd ask is, what deems success to you? What, you know, so for, you know, I talked about this before we got on the phone call with you, like, and for me, success is about being happy in the moment, you know, happiness now. And, you know, as I said, I'd probably say after writing 5 books and speaking in 35, 38 countries, what would I deem success? If my 12-year-old scored a goal in the League of Ireland, I'd probably consider that my version of success. So why I say that is because a lot of people say, well, it's okay for you to talk about, doing what you love, but I have a mortgage. Well, I have a mortgage as well. And I've had many ups and downs, but I focus on the dream, and, you know, we're alive and happy in this moment. I think people need to start off with this question is, okay, so what does success mean to me? How would I know when I'm successful? And maybe when you think about it in detail, you may just be able to build your practice, do a part-time or whatever. You know, success doesn't mean you have £1 million in the bank. That means nothing. And I mean, again, all studies show that after a certain amount, which is normally somewhere around $50,000 or 50,000 euros, money becomes irrelevant because you're able to pay your bills, etc., etc. So it's just a question to ponder. I think if there is a will, there is a way. I've always believed that. I know that's an old Irish saying, but I believe it.
Yeah. A few points that I'd like to touch on. Listening to your hunch, I think, is very important. And that's probably why you completed that book. And it was the same reason why I went into working in this field in breathing back 20 years ago. I had an overwhelming gut feeling. And if I was to go by logic and think about it and talk to other people, I would have been talked out of it. But I listened to my gut feeling. And I think part of the reason why we can listen to our gut feeling is because we can bring a stillness to the mind, that original and creative ideas can emerge. So ultimately, I'm often wondering, like, why in terms of our education system, it hasn't gave students and kids, you know, any information about finding a job that really suits their talents. And you spoke, the guy wants to pay the mortgage. Well, I tell you one thing, it's a lot easier to pay a mortgage when you're in a field that you love, because you'll tend to be good at it. Absolutely. And you'll do it effortless.
And you'll be rewarded for it.
Totally. And in terms of mental health, you're in a much better position. And as human beings, we all need a purpose in life. And, you know, some people will have their purposes, you know, bringing their kids to a football game of a Saturday. And that's great. But we all need something, you know, that when things are not so good, that we have a constant there that can take us out of that. Now, for me, the breath, the mind, sleep, emotions, and functioning in day-to-day life is absolutely intertwined. And I would look at concentration as your ability to hold your attention on a subject matter for a period of time without distraction. In other words, how long can you hold your undivided attention on something? And if we are distracted by external environments, or if we are distracted by an internal monologue, we need to be able to train the brain. So I think it's important to train the brain to be focused by placing our attention on our breathing. And of course, at the start, it's a little bit frustrating. The mind wanders off, we bring it back. The mind wanders off, we bring it back. Now, for me, it has definitely brought a stillness to the mind. Is there times that you too have agitation of the mind? Of course, it's a normal human trait. Is there times that there may be anger? Of course, it's a normal human trait, but you recover much quicker. And also, you don't get upset by small situations. When the mind is already agitated, it doesn't take much of a situation to put that person into a state of stress. Like if I had a difficult situation that had to be handled, and if you had two people in front of you, one with an agitated mind or one with a clear capacity to focus and concentrate, I would much rather give the task to the person with the clear capacity and focus to concentrate. And we develop that. So, you know, I would say that in light of what you've been talking about, and in light of attention deficit society, which I know I've heard you mention quite a number of times, to improve attention, how do we do that? And focusing on the breath is one, bringing our attention into the present moment awareness is another, taking our attention into the inner body is another, and then looking at sleep quality. How can you be productive to focus to the best of your ability? If you're sleeping with an open mouth all night, stopping breathing during sleep, snoring, having sleep fragmentation, and I'll always use the point that if anybody is waking up with a dry mouth in the morning, they are not likely to feel refreshed. So, and you know, we need the capacity to have clarity of thinking, that we can hone our attention on what we want to hone it upon, and also to have the ability to set aside distractions that we can then focus, regardless, like whether it's writing a book, which is a long-term project. You know, if you're constantly getting distracted, I don't know what you said, every 3 minutes or something, and it takes you 23 minutes to get back into the swing of
2
things.
minutes to 5 seconds. But just can I give you a practical application of that?
Sure,
because,
totally.
You know, so I mean, sometimes people say, "Oh, you're focusing the breath, and that's difficult," and all of that, but it really isn't. So, for example, as you know, hundreds of studies have shown that if you actually lived by the seaside or lived by nature, but just by going by the sea, that has a calming effect without you doing anything. But one thing that I used to do, I'll firstly bring you back, because there has to be a right timing on this as well. So I have to be honest about this and put my hands up. In 1996, all those years ago, I went and lived with the Indians high up in the Andes in Peru. And one of the first challenges they set us high up in the most breathtaking scenery. Now, I was very much in the midst of, I'm gung-ho, I'm going to be a millionaire, I haven't got time to waste, so give me as much information as possible. I need to get out of here. And the first challenge they set was, Kevin, we'd like you to go over there and sit and do nothing for 10 minutes. And I was going, hold on here now for a minute, Paddy. Look, I don't think you quite get this. You need to give me information, not do nothing. I didn't pay, X amount to get over here. But now in retrospect, and of course I did it, but did it very poorly. I sat there in the most beautiful scenery and I couldn't drink in the scenery, as Rumi would say, more like, thoughts were coming into my mind and I was going, what am I doing here? Am I the only Irish person that came to the other side of the world to be told to do nothing, etc.? But now I look back and see the massive wisdom there was, because what I do now, myself personally, I don't, do a huge amount of meditation, but what I try to do as much as possible is I go down to the sea and I go for a walk. And I might do one of two things. I might count the steps just to focus on mindful walking, or I might just stop, look at the waves, thoughts come into my mind, go back to focus on the waves, and do that for no more than 10, 15 minutes. And genuinely, I notice it's like a weight. It's like as if my head's been emptied and you come back with greater clarity. Whenever I'm stuck, that's where I go to the sea. So I think that that's very practical. It doesn't have to be seaside. You can walk into the field behind your house, and do mindful walking. You can look at the wind blowing the leaves or whatever. So it's not a difficult thing to do, but I think it's incredibly powerful and it's backed up by a huge amount of research that proves that it really does work. The other interesting thing, I just want to tell you one other beautiful story from my experience with the Indians. We met a group of Indians, Quechuan Indians, that hadn't interacted with, us
Western
humans
Europeans.
And in their dictionary, they had no word for I at all. Everything, their language was about we, which I thought was very beautiful. But also they lived their life based on what was called Aini, A-Y-N-I, which was reciprocation. So when two Quechuans met for the first time, they would set a challenge. It might be, let's see who's the fastest of the two of us to run down the village. Whoever won, society dictated that they taught that person until they achieved similar competency, not necessarily the same competency. And for that, they taught the other person a skill. I thought it was a beautiful.
It's amazing. Yeah.
I think
totally.
The main point of relating back, because I am aware of attention deficit, very mindful of it. And if people just left this, I'm sure a lot of your community do this anyway, but just in the context of taking time out and focusing on doing nothing. That's as good a management technique in terms of clarity, creativity. As I said, I used it mainly, and I still use it, that if I'm writing or coming up with a piece, down to the sea if I'm stuck for ideas. I do that all the time. If I'm also writing a new speech and I want to get a program so it's conversational, I'll walk down by the sea and talk through it. And you'll notice ideas coming into your head all the time, without a doubt. And, it works. And I'm as left brain on this as it comes. It works, without a doubt.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with you. And I don't think we have to be meditating formally. I think life is a meditation. If we go for a walk, not to be stuck in our head, not to be constantly involved and immersed in our own thought activity, is to get out of our head, bring our attention out of the mind into the body or onto the breath. It's a learned skill. I've seen some people with the best concentration, amazing, who had it naturally. I didn't. I had to learn it. And again, I often wonder, Western education, we are trained how to think, to break information into tiny pieces, to analyze, to decipher. We're trained how to think but we are not trained how to stop thinking. And sometimes people may feel guilty about doing nothing. But what you're saying is that this doing nothing for 10 minutes is the best investment of
for
your time.
personal growth. Yeah, and the other thing too, and I think, again, this is another huge, what I consider a modern day myth. Now, I know it's going to disturb people, but I'm going to say it anyway. We haven't got enough time in the day. So here's the challenge for the people that's saying that within your community. I want them to actually detail a full day, and I'm going to give them an alternative. Start in the morning from 8 to 12. Make sure that this baby is not in the room. Every day from 8 to 12, and some companies are adopting this, no email. You can check your email in the morning, that's it. From 8 to 12, it is clear, focused time on the project at hand.
Yeah.
No mobile phone, no distractions, no meetings, no contribution to anything. If they only did that, they would probably do more work in that 4 hours, because based on pure stats, by the way, Intel calculated that it's costing distraction is costing them $1 billion a year. Distraction is costing them. So if I was anyone, I'd say, right, 8 to 12, I'm going to focus on my YouTube interviews. I'm going to do some online research. And at 12 o'clock, then I can check my email and, open up to the real world. Close all your browsers. You don't need to see them. And to be honest with you, I don't know how people do it, frankly speaking. I don't do it. Clearly, I am on social media. No question about that. Not its greatest fan, I have to say, because it's making us all dopamine junkies. Because the minute that hit of a notification comes, we're high as a kite, back on we're likes. Anyway, that's just...
No, Kevin, I totally agree with you. We are on it too, because it's the only way now that information is really being transmitted, from person to person. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. But I have to bear in mind that while there are some positives with it, there are a lot of negatives, and distraction and the consumption of people's time is one of those negatives. So
that's where we're saying we don't have enough time.
And it's even more than that, because if you feel that you're totally overwhelmed in your workplace, that's going to lead to burnout. Yeah. And there must be something that burnout has increased so much in the last few years. So we as, working, no matter whether we are working in a small little business, whether we are self-employed, whether we are working for a multinational, it doesn't matter. We really need to be able to manage our own time. And we also need to bring a stillness to the mind, because when we feel overwhelmed, if everything gets on top of us, we are not going to be productive anyway. And it's a self-fulfilling circle, because if we're exhausted, if we're stressed, we're exhausted, we have energy depletion, we can't do the task, that feeds back into it. And from a mental health perspective, and also, sleep, etc. There was...
This is back, can I just want to butt in and say...
of course.
This, Pat, is that, and you mentioned it though, but again, we have to look at what we can control. We can control our environment. We can control our choices. And controlling the environment means that if, for example, let's say, if you know you have a task to be completed, I'm saying to you, make it 8 to 12, email free, social media free. And trust me, that on its own it'll jumpstart your productivity. Because remember, as I said, you're interrupted and it takes you 23 minutes to get back to focus. So you can imagine we're on a major, merry-go-round in terms of work every day. So I started doing this, and I have to say, I just think it's absolutely the best thing ever. So, no phone calls about soccer matches and the soccer training between 8 and 12. And, because you can
totally,
talking about your other passion, which is your kids. So it's making decisions to control the environment. Similarly, I'm not an expert on it. In fact, I know very little, if anything, about it. But I clearly know that sleep is very important. But there is a routine in it, isn't there? In terms of, winding down, what's in the room, not, reading an email before you go to sleep. And
not exposing yourself to blue light. I remember being at a sleep conference, and I was at a few of them with there was Dr. Christian Guilleminault from Stanford. He's since passed on. And I remember him, there were many, many medical doctors talking about sleep quality that day. And Dr. Guilleminault stood up and he says, "You're talking about everything bar one thing, And that's the importance of nasal breathing during sleep. And when I did that, Kevin, that was the single biggest thing that made a huge difference to my energy levels back 20 years ago. Simply switching to breathing through the nose. And when you look at the statistics, people over 40 years of age, they are 6 times more likely to spend at least 50% of their sleep time breathing both through the mouth and through the nose. Yeah, doing both at the same time. So in terms of sleep apnea, in terms of snoring, all of that is having a depletion on energy levels. And again, it's coming full circle, because if you don't get a good sleep, it's people coming into me with anxiety and depression. And then I speak to them and I ask them, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? And they say they wake up exhausted. And I ask, well, has anybody asked you about your sleep quality? Not the length of time that you go to sleep for. You could be asleep for 10 hours, but you mightn't even have a decent sleep depth during that 10 hours. And you might still wake up exhausted, and probably more likely to wake up exhausted. So all too often, we have to see the bidirectional relationship. Anxiety of the mind messes with sleep. And if sleep quality is not right, it leads to anxiety of the mind. And breathing plays a role in both. Because when we can improve breathing, we can improve sleep, and we can also bring a calmness to the mind and increase blood flow and oxygen delivery to the brain. So, in terms of the corporate environment, talking about what you've talked about and what I've listened to, and our application of it, I think there's a great fit in the business world. And I would love to see leaders, especially for their employees, and especially those employees who are suffering from stress, that it really is a key decision in terms of managing their time, but also having the ability and the tools to have the energy and to have the focus and to have the awareness, to better deal and to better handle, how things are going on.
Yeah, and I think there is a great opportunity, and you did ask that question. Are there many leaders out there like that? It's still very much a baby stage, to think that, as I said, in 1996, I talked about in silence comes wisdom. It's still not fully mainstream, the whole mindfulness thing, it still isn't. I mean, yeah, there is the bean bags, and there is the tuck shop, and there is the table tennis, there's all the games, but and there is in a few companies, of course, the mindfulness room, but look, a lot more work can be done on it. But I would say the following. I would say that what needs to happen, let's say, on your side, because unfortunately these people only operate in raw data, I would start a report by saying, listen guys, you're making an absolute hames of this. Less than 30% of your employees are actually disengaged. So that's failure. I'm going to give you the facts behind how this can work, and you quantify it and give them raw data. And I suppose you almost need to get into pilot companies who will allow you to put in a program so that they can see a before and after. That's
yes,
everything.
Yeah. It has to be measurable.
Has to be measurable, because if it's not measurable, it's easy dismissive. And unfortunately, well, for me, talking about walking down by the sea is still anecdotal. It's not scientific enough, even though Davidson and hundreds of other people have proven the power of mindfulness in terms of stress reduction, engagement, productivity, etc.
Yeah.
But what would I say? I would say the next step is to keep up the good work in terms of PR and keep bringing it out there into public consciousness. But maybe the next step is to go to a company and say, listen, we will do the research study for you. It's not going to in any way discommode your employees. It's not going to affect their on the job work daily, but we'll be giving them a whole series of activities that they can do after work that'll help. And let's measure it after 3 months and see what happens. Just as an idea, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. No, I think it's really important. For one, I wouldn't have had the productivity and the creativity and the immense, energy in terms of the application of what I'm doing, unless I had the ability to quiet my mind, unless I had the ability to improve functional breathing, and unless I had the ability to improve sleep quality. So I think they're traits that are really, really important. And if they were not important 20 years ago, they are very, very important.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Like I got a phone call yesterday as well from somebody who will remain unnamed. And, you know, they asked me, are you really worried about, you know, getting, you know, COVID like? And, you know, and they were really anxious about it, and they really cared as well. It came from that place. And like, oh, I don't believe I'm Superman, but it doesn't come into my head. I don't spend my time thinking about something that I can't control. You know, so you just focus on what you can control right now. So there is a lot of anxiety out there, and I understand that there is a lot of fear out there. But what I would say as, you know, a closing kind of key message on this is, you know, focus on the controllables. What can you do to improve your communication skills, improve your ability to be in the moment, that you have that clarity, you have that creativity. What can you be doing now? That's what I would be focusing on. And also finding out, I suppose it's the journey of a lifetime for some, but finding out what is your bliss, what is your purpose, you know, what is your North Star, because that will propel your business further. And as I said, I know a lot of people ask me almost to keep repeating this, but I do think it's clear that if 30%, less than 30% of your audience is, you know, engaged, that means there's a lot of people walking in with head down into a company. And I'm suggesting, you know what? You go in there with the mindset that, you know, today is another audition for my dream job. And let's see how that mindset will work, as opposed to going in, getting up in the morning saying, oh, good Jesus, another day.
Excellent, Kevin. You've said it all.